Hello fellow painters. This week I wanted to continue painting fur, but on different shapes and with different colors. I found this bee on my mini factory. I have made a few changes to the original. I exchanged the base to one that fits better in my opinion. In the original base, the bee holder is not transparent, and I felt that the base was missing something. Links to both elements can be found in the description below. But for now, grab your paints, brushes, and let's start. One major disadvantage of painting yellow over black with acrylics is that it requires many layers of opaque yellow paint to cover the black completely. Acrylic paints, especially lower quality ones, can be quite transparent when thinned down. Additionally, the more layers of acrylic paint applied, the more surface can become raised and textured, which may not be the desired effect. That's why I used white ink with the airbrush to pre-highlight the miniature, which will make painting yellow over black much more enjoyable. I started to paint my bee with the airbrush and used this great yellow-brown as my base color for all yellow areas. On some parts you can apply more than one layer, because the more sand column you use, the more it turns to brown and will create a natural shade without the need for additional colors. On the small areas I used my regular brush. If you paint all areas with your regular brush, consider thinning the paint a bit for a better flow and to avoid overly thick layers of paint. I started with the dry brush method to accent all yellow fur areas, pulling out all the flock and hair details. You can do this with a regular brush, but I don't see the reason to do so. Keep in mind that the dry brush must be nearly completely dry, otherwise you will just paint with a thick loaded brush and the desired effect will not work. Army Painter Cosmic Dust was used with the airbrush to accent the most raised areas of the fur on her legs. I thinned down Cosmic Dust to ensure that it does not overpaint my previous work, but only accent it correctly where it should, which would be on the joints where light hits the surface. Vallejo Cavalry Brown was dry-brushed on the connections between black and yellow to pull out all the flock and hair details in these areas. Again, make sure your brush is dry because you only want to accentuate the hair details, not ruin your previous work. In the areas where I was not able to reach with my dry brush, I painted the details later on with my regular brush and corrected the dry brushed hairs as well. Army Painter Fire Drake was painted with the regular brush on the leg areas. Because we already pre-highlighted them, we will achieve a nice black-brownish color scheme. At this point, I wanted to prepare the wings, eyes and armor on Helix, so I reached for white ink again and corrected the highlights on the most raised areas. At this point, you need to be sure of what you are doing. If you're not sure if you will overspray some areas, use protection like masking putty to cover the areas in danger, especially on the wing connections. Army Painter Forest Sprite was painted on all armor areas and the saddle. This yellowish green will be a perfect harmony with our yellow on the bee. Vallejo Bile Green was diluted a bit with airbrush thinner for a better flow and was painted on all raised areas of the armor and saddle. I am thinning nearly all colors that I am using with the airbrush, because less often is the best solution and gives a better final effect. It is better to apply several layers than to repaint an whole element. Vallejo Liver Green was used with my regular brush for all edge highlights and weathering on the armor. I painted something similar to the leaves from last week, so you can check the recording on my channel. The link will appear at the top of the screen. In this case, I left out the wet blending with brown, and as always, I tried to highlight in an interesting way instead of following all edges with my brush. I did not want to paint the eyes just black, so I used Tyrian Navy to give my bee a bluish accent. After that, I painted some light reflection on her eyes at the top corner of the eyes. At the very finish, I will additionally highlight the eyes, but for now I wanted to focus on her wings. Because the wings are transparent in nature and shimmer with different colors, I wanted to reflect this effect in my painting. I heavily thinned Caribbean Ocean to a wash consistency and poured the paint into the corners of the wings. If you watch closely, you will notice that the wings are divided by some strings, and luckily my paint was thin enough to stay in those corners. What was important, I needed to let this dry by itself, which was really time consuming. After Caribbean Ocean dried, I wanted to pull out all wing details, so I used the dry brushing technique for it. With Warlord Purple, I did the same as with Caribbean Ocean. I thinned it down heavily and poured it into the little wing fragments. Because I did this only on a couple of wing elements, some of the Caribbean Ocean changed into a more bluish tone, giving me a more interesting wing appearance. After the colors dried, I dry brushed the wings once again to pull out all details, leaving me with some cool looking colors and transitions. After I prepared my base and mounted the bee on the base, I needed to highlight the top elements of the fur a bit. Only those elements where the light hits the most. I did not highlight all single flocks because this would look weird, so I highlighted the top elements of the flocks. I wanted to highlight the facial elements to better stand out, but I did not want anything too extreme. I already have some highlights, so a few edges and dots will do the trick. After I was done, I grabbed some white color and accented some of the highlights a bit with a dot and some edges. With a sponge and some yellow color, I added interesting patterns on the base, especially on those elements where the light hits the surface. Using a sponge is always handy if you are trying to create a random pattern. This mix serves two purposes. First, it is an interesting addition to the base, making it more eye-catching. And second, it holds the stick that is connected to my bee. I was not sure if super glue would hold this mini. That's why the honey as resin is a perfect solution. I have used ready resin that you saw on the screen. But if you're mixing the resin by yourself, the proportions should be 4 grams of hardener per 10 grams of resin. I hope you have liked this one. If yes, don't forget to comment down below, like the recording, subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you the next time. Bye bye!